pathways. I noticed that C. McEwen, I have to guess at your first name, maybe you can change it on Zoom. Carrie, I've worked it out next to it there. So you probably know lots about this and you can contribute to that about the career pathways piece. Just as we kick off, what I wanted to do as well is, if you're obviously interested in learning, in fact, I'll ask this question later to you, is towards the end, we'll be asking, we're just revamping our next subset of webinar topics. So if you have a specific topic that you'd like to see us cover over the next 6 months or so, we'll be asking for your thoughts on that. So in fact, what I'll do is I'm going to pop a poll up for you to have a look at, just to do a first practice poll, and let us know. You can choose more than one of these in terms of these webinar topics, and just give some idea. So there should be a list of topics. Just know what interests you in terms of webinars, what you'd like to see us cover in future, and choose as many as you think would be interesting to you. So while you're doing that, I'm going to carry on. And the key thing here that I wanted to focus in on is, what is almost the business case for us focusing on this topic? Why is this so important and so interesting to us in terms of learning? Well, when I did some homework about this, I was interested. I got quite a decent amount of this presentation from the CIPD, so it's pretty well researched. And I thought some of these figures were really important, and actually they were during the pandemic that I got this. So some of this might be even more relevant now. So at the time of this survey, fewer than half of UK employees, and it was obviously a UK-based survey, but let's assume it's applicable to Hong Kong and other places, felt that their job offered good opportunities for them to develop their skills. Now, this survey, I've got to assume, was pre-pandemic. So right now, when people are in a hybrid environment, I wonder whether people feel they've developed their skills. I mean, arguably, we have developed digital skills that we didn't have before, but would we feel they were the skills we wanted to develop? Could that be feeding into things like our Great Resignation? Interesting to reflect on. Also, they found that case studies said that often the learning provision that people are used to receiving isn't seen as fit for purpose. So traditional, let's say, e-learning or even training courses, it wasn't necessarily as effective as people thought it should be when we were introducing new technologies. From a point of view of surveying learning and development practitioners, only a third of them felt that they had managed to develop a positive learning culture. And we'll talk in a moment about what we think that looks like. And hybrid and remote working has forced people to develop skills really quickly, and they need to know where to go to learn things. And often you haven't got people to ask. Obviously, and many of us, my preference would be to ask someone, tell me the answer. But if we haven't got that person handy to ask, then it's much more difficult, isn't it? And the final thing, which I think is incredibly relevant now we're coming out the other side of the pandemic, is that development or opportunities to learn and grow is a key aspect of employee engagement, which is likely to make people stay with an organisation. So people who feel that they're being invested in, they're going to feel valued, and hopefully we're going to retain them within our organisation. So we need to be thinking about learning and growth as a differentiator. It can be a key compelling reason why people choose to stay with us. So that's the reason I think it's quite important to us to start thinking about learning. But I did say I'm going to ask you this question earlier. What would you describe as a learning culture? And thank you very much for your feedback on the webinar topics. I'm going to take that. They're quite even, so I'm not going to bother sharing that one from, I don't know whether I have to. I'll just quickly share it and take it away so that we can refer back to it. So using the chat, if you were going to define what a learning culture is, what would you say a learning culture is? Harriet's given you a bit of a plug for her tophatcoaching.com. So she coaches teams and individuals, so very relevant, might be useful. I'm just looking at who I've got. Okay, so you teach people, you train people, Colin. So finance role. So Isati, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name right. That's how you put it up before. I'm assuming that's a pronunciation. Please chat and tell me how I should do it, or even unmute if you want to. Another one is Alan's saying where mistakes are welcome and used as a basis for improvement. Yes, that's interesting. I did a topic last month. You can get the recording if it's of interest to you, on psychological safety. And actually that's a key part. If we want to learn, you need to feel that we can make mistakes, and that's how we learn. And you need to be in a psychologically safe environment. Anita, that's a good one, isn't it? Where people prioritize their development and promote it. Quite rare, but does that happen? Continuous development and opportunities to learn, says Lauren. Akuya Isa, thank you. Staff engagement and ownership. This is the thing, isn't it? Where the wish to learn is rewarded in the range of ways organisation can do it. So a variety of options, flexible offer. Great stuff there. Act on feedback, says Romy. I think those are really good definitions. I think they're probably better than this one, in fairness. The definition that I've got here is an environment where learning is not only embedded, but encouraged across every level of the organisation. And that's quite an interesting one. And we'll look at this in terms of how we can think about an organisation and what learning should look like at those different levels. So going back to the polls, let's talk about your learning culture if you're in an organisation. And I know a couple of you are independent. So what you could do there is think about an organisation you work with, or perhaps where you used to work if you were there before. So how would you define your current level of learning culture? It doesn't really exist. There's a few pockets of keen beans, but it's kind of ad hoc almost. So you've been really working on it. So people are trying to learn that, maybe prioritize learning to a certain extent, and definitely where you've got real examples of it. Now, just while we wait as people are responding there, there's one person said definitely, and the definitely is an almost. Would you be happy to put in the chat what makes you say that? What would definitely look like? Because that's quite a good one. I know people have said this before when I've run this session. They've talked about things where people were really sort of proactively choosing what they wanted to learn and sharing that learning with others, and just quite creative ways in which information was being shared. So was it you, Carrie, that were learning? I think that's your definition of learning culture. So if you thought yours was definitely a high level of learning culture, it was strong. My question's a bit strange, isn't it? Rate. So at the highest level of learning culture, what does it look like? What's your evidence for that? So I'll end and share the poll so you can see what others have said. So if you felt that you had a little bit of a way to go, you're in pockets, you're in your fellow company, you're in the majority. So let's see what we can do if we want to really try and build more of a learning culture. Well, the case for it, building the business case, and that's part of the start of it, because you may need to ask for investment in some way, or an investment could be money, or it could be time for people to prioritize it. CIPD research suggests that there's a link between a learning culture and growth, profitability, transformation, and productivity. So organizations that enable this, they are going to be the more successful organizations. Also, there's more motivation for us to transfer learning. Now, the benefit of transferring learning is, of course, as less mistakes are made. If you want to do less of the boring stuff, you might be able to transfer learning to somebody who's a new starter, and that upskills them. Or it might be a great way if you're in a career pathway where you're able to learn from someone else and you transfer learning down, and therefore you can get rid of some of the more basic aspects of your role and transfer that learning over, which allows you to have more time and space to grow. It's about knowledge management and sharing, which of course impacts skills and organisational performance, and it is going to directly link to job satisfaction, organisational commitment and turnover, highly, highly relevant topics right now. So let's see. Okay, so Alan, yours is on, it's the organisation is small, but focus on mind development as a business. So people sort of are thinking about growing, just learning. So that's something, is almost a culture. Is that coming from the top, Alan? Is that what you're saying? Is there someone at the top very into learning, maybe that's being role modeled very strongly? CPD, if you're having to do, it's the thing about CPD, Colin, is though that people often treat it as something they have to do as opposed to something that they genuinely want to do. So it becomes tick box, like compliance training. And I guess, Harriet, I think it depends why people have gone for in pockets. My experience is that you might have small teams that are really motivated to learn, or it could be more about compliance. But there are other areas that maybe the line managers there won't give you any time for learning. They don't really demonstrate that they value it. So you're all about resilience. Okay, that's really interesting, Alan. Thank you. And in terms of the types of learning or development that's going on in your organisation, and of course, we're talking how it's been for the last year or so, which you may or may not have been working remotely or in a hybrid environment, and also as we come out of that. So how have you been learning? How would you describe the learning that's been taking place in your organisation now? And you can choose more than one here. in terms of the type. So is it mainly people, because let's say financial services and you've got to do money laundering training, etc. So people do it because they have to, or in the NHS they have to do statutory mandatory. Maybe that people are learning loads actually because they're having to make it all up as they go along, but they want formal development, so they're not recognizing or valuing that on the job learning. Could be lots of content. You might have got an amazing learning management platform with hundreds of courses, but no one uses them. Or people are really self-sufficient, so they research stuff but they don't share the information. Active problem solving, where people are much more active and out there, more of a learning, I would say that's more of a learning culture, this one. If you're problem solving, you're teaching yourself, but you're also sharing the information. Or a sophisticated blending approach, whereas learning's at all levels. People formally information share, they informally information share, they utilize training courses, they utilize your e-learning, you have a good uptake on anything that you offer out there. So let's see what you say there. Okay, so that's again, so that doesn't, that's that again, many of us are saying that there's a bit of a gap. There's lots of content, but people don't use that. So why is that? Some of its compliance will depend on which industry you're in, but there is some active problem solving. One of the main things here then, if you've got, sorry, I didn't share the results there, you won't see what I'm talking about. So I'm seeing here that you're always going to have tick box compliance. Some people feel they don't recognize learning on the job. How do you solve that? Well, it's about the line manager helping people realize how much they're learning. You know, since we've been working at home, do you realize what you've actually learned? I mean, I tell you what, I've learned how to operate on three, I don't think I can operate without them now. I've got 3 screens. I wouldn't have known how to do that. And I've got polls and participants and chat and slides up. I've learned how to multitask on digital. I didn't know how to do that before. Now, had you shown me how to do that 3 years ago, I don't think I'd have known I wanted to do it. So some of it's about relevance to what you need to do, but we've actually all probably learned a lot of new skills. It's just whether or not we appreciate them and recognize them. And some of that's about, therefore, just acknowledging and having that conversation. If you've got lots of content and low take-up, that's an interesting one. How can we do more needs analysis, make sure that it's relevant to what people want, and make sure it's easy to find? And then the self-sufficient research and the problem-solving ones, I think the key with that one is how can we get people to share information? And we'll share some ideas later. Is it about lunch and learns, or just putting it on a team meeting that people get more comfortable to proactively share their learning? So how do you learn best? So tell me in the chat, if you were if you needed to learn a new task, what do you do? How do you feel that you learn best? Anita and Liz Parr, word for word, having a go. Yeah. Does then so that means getting hands-on, doing it. Trial and error sometimes, isn't it? Does anyone learn best by sort of reading things, or so no, yeah, okay, I was like that you actually do like to observe, so that's interesting. So we've got observing, so maybe seeing someone else do it. Lauren reads, listens to podcasts, and then being hands-on. Okay, this is great. Mentoring. So Colin, are you saying you actually learn by mentoring others or being mentored? Because I think that's an interesting one, that sometimes you learn as much, if not more, by teaching or helping others, don't you? Scheduling regular time, Alan, so having that discipline to do it. Okay, so Harriet's saying a task you're hands-on, a more fundamental career development, you need an effective course or something, so something where there's a bit more sort of input there. And that makes total sense. And this fits plan, do, review, pretty much this, Alan. So plan, do, review, this model, as far as I know, it's not been disproven. Kolb's learning cycle, I learned this 30 years ago. And it makes sense in terms of how we can take on information. And the premise that I've always understood this for is that it's a cycle. The key is a cycle. You need to close the cycle to learn something properly. So you might learn things by having an experience. So some people are someone who, you know, actually, and some of us prefer to start there. So those of you said, actually, I like to get stuck in, I like to get started, I like to try things out, trial and error. We might be more activist. We like to kind of learn by doing. And maybe we just lose interest if we were watching someone. So our starting point, our preference for starting point might be doing, getting hands-on. Other people, their starting point, some of you said, they're listening to something, watching someone or observing, they prefer to start with reflection. So watching somebody do something, getting an idea from it. Now, if I've learned by doing, having the experience, I should still reflect. And actually, that's probably one of the problems with people who have a preference for active, because they sometimes don't create enough time for reflection. And this is where things like reflection and theorizing, which is where you think about how something, you create a theory for that. I'll do an example in a moment for theory as to what that was you learned from that situation, and then you can choose to apply it again in future. And then that takes you right through the cycle, because you might go, okay, I'll use a stupid example for now. So let's say I've just put my hand in the fire, or I've touched a hot stove. So I have an experience where I've burnt my hand. I might reflect on that experience and think, okay, when I put my hand in the flickering red flame or on the stove that was on, it hurt, right? Because my reflexes slipped in. My theory might be that if I touch something that is hot, or flickering flames like a fire, it's likely to hurt. My application in that situation might be not to do it again. So I choose not to do it again. On the flip side of it might be, I had an experience where the customer came in, they were absolutely screaming at me, and I took a deep breath and I slowed down my voice and I listened really intently, and they became much calmer. So I might reflect on that and think, okay, actually that turned out okay with that customer. What was it that I actually did? Because obviously I interacted in the moment. What did I actually do in that situation? Well, clearly, and maybe this is where having a coach or a manager who's giving feedback to you can be really helpful. Maybe the fact that I actually did drop my voice and slowed right down, that had the effect of calming the other person. My theory is that that's the way to deal with conflict. I'll try that next time I come across a conflict application. And then hopefully if I do that, it works again and you've got learning. So this is a cycle. The thing to take from this really is the fact that none of us really learn purely by one thing or another. You need to complete the cycle. So you might have read loads and loads of books. Let's say I'm the next brain surgeon. I've read every book there is, but I really wouldn't want someone to come and operate on my brain until I know that they've actually had the experience and the feedback of that and the feedback loops. So how we can help people with that, and I think this is the point really, is that actually there's not one size fits all in terms of learning, but also where we have a preference, we still need to force ourselves to utilize the other preferences that may not be our main ones. And add into that the fact that research appears to indicate that social learning is increasing, which probably wasn't even seen as a learning a few years ago. So the model, and this is a shift in time, this data was from 2018, and it basically said that it was 1,500 professionals, and it basically said that more and more people were preferring to learn on the job and through social learning. So social, I'm assuming interacting with others, talking to others, that kind of thing. So 50% is kind of social, and 50% is on the job. Whereas formal, very small amount of it is formal training. Yet many of the people that if we're a learning development person that we're supporting in an organization, don't acknowledge or don't recognize that they have been developed necessarily, unless they feel they've been on a formal training course. So it's an interesting one. Now, certainly we've seen over the last 2 years that it's been so much more acceptable to learn like we're doing now, really. And I suppose if you've noticed by me using the chat and polls, what I'm trying to do is make it active as well as reflective. Otherwise, if I was just talking to you through a webinar, then all you're getting is one-way information. It's just purely reflective, and that's not going to close the loop. So that's one of the points of how I always try to make the webinars a little bit more interactive, because it hopefully, and we try to make them pragmatic as well, think about how we can apply things, hopefully hits more of that learning cycle for you. So interesting there is, how can we help people to recognize that learning socially and on the job is actually something that they're good. Thanks, Ozan. Is something that's going on there. So on to our next bit of interaction. So in your organizations, how have people been learning over here? And there is the 6 options which are as per the slide. So are they all been doing things by just survival, Googling videos, that sort of thing? Have they been doing it by collaborating over social channels, like talking to others? Are they using your e-learning? Have there been external webinars or live content, more like this, through manager or peer feedback? Now, actually, there's a tool I will mention at the end, our 360 feedback tool, which is actually a really great formalized way of helping people to learn, very good learning about your behaviors. Sorry, I've got a radiator under my desk, which keeps going hot and then cold, or actually through to formal training. So how have your people been predominantly learning? And again, you can choose more than one, just interesting there. And if it's something else, then what's your other? So Abby's saying other things have been internal webinars. So internals, absolutely, because I've said external there. So you've been teaching people. What sort of topics have been on the internal webinars, Abby? And is that your organisation conducted learning 1.4 every Friday, once or twice in a month? So what's learning? Tell us a little bit about what learning 1.4 is that. So you've been proactively developing new ways for people to learn. Okay, well done, 83%. So I'll stop and share that. So the majority here have been e-learning is the most common one, but you can see a really nice range of self-sufficiency, some manager and peer feedback, external things, so a whole range of things. But you can see more digital stuff, I suppose, which makes sense when we haven't been able to be quite so face-to-face. Were the internal training courses face-to-face, or were you doing those online, I wonder? So I'll keep an eye on the chat if any of you want to tell us a little bit more about that. So yeah, you had to go virtual, that would make sense, yes. Okay, so you spend 1.4 hours. Do you mean a quarter? I'm interested in that specific calculation. Is that an hour and a quarter? An hour and 20 minutes? That's maybe coming through in the chat confusion there, but you're dedicating time on learning. So that's quite impressive, isn't it? Okay, so now a little bit about the tips, I suppose, for how you might want to look at learning at 3 levels in your organisation. And I took this from the CIPD. So if you want to find out more about this, you can go back to the CIPD website if you're a member, and they've got lots of good content on this. So they talked about assessing our current culture at 3 levels. How do individuals learn? How do teams learn? And how do we learn as an organisation? So if we start at the top, coming back down, first of all, for having a learning culture, because that's after all the topic of this, is there a clear vision for learning that's supported by the leadership and aligned with business strategy? So 2 really important things there. Do we know what we're trying to learn? Do we know where we're going in terms of learning? Are the leaders in the organisation supportive of that? i.e., are they going to make sure, help people or support people in spending the time on the learning? And is it relevant to both the individual's career plan and the business strategy? Because if it isn't in that way, in some way, there's no why for us to have that learning. And that links next. The next level of why that's your strategic why, but the next level of the why is at the individual's why. So is learning aligned to roles or career development? So learning should be relevant to the job I do now or to the job that I want to go into. Are we encouraging reflection? So I think someone raised that point earlier. Is it safe for us to reflect and to challenge positively? So is there an environment of psychological safety? And again, is risk and experimentation encouraged? Do we invest in learning, both time and resources? And is learning passive, so something that's almost done to people, compliance driven, or so kind of with it that, it's available when you need it? You can go and find that little bit of learning when you're about to go and do an appraisal. You can go and find that relevant bit of learning just when you need it, as opposed to having to plan ahead to get that skill or knowledge in advance. So those would be the sort of things, if you ask yourself and you're trying to think culturally, organisationally, how would we demonstrate a learning culture, then those points would fit there. In terms of the next level, so manager level, here the point is, do we think that managers buy into and support, and actually managers can make a huge difference, formal or informal learning? Have they received adequate development themselves? And this is a really key one, because actually many of our organisations, I mean, we ended up doing a huge amount of virtual manager training over the 2 years of kind of pandemic, because I think all of a sudden managers, they'd never really had any management training and realised that they got away with not knowing how to when they were face-to-face with people, but once you work remotely, it was so much harder. They didn't have the confidence, the skills to set objectives, give good quality feedback. So we need to make sure that managers are being given the skills, because a huge amount of learning should take place between the manager and the employee. So whether it's through coaching and guidance, or through encouraging that person to go and find things out for themselves and listening to what they've learned. So it's about role modeling it in terms of that, and possessing coaching skills. And then at an individual level, are individuals aware of formal or informal learning opportunities? So are they alert to the learning that's out there? Because you can be in an organization, you're providing all this amazing content and then no one uses it. So are they aware, or and if they don't use it, why don't they use it? Because they can't see it, they're not aware of it, they're not motivated, they're not being encouraged. Need to know why they're not using it if that's the case. And that links into accountability. Do they see their manager as being accountable, or them as being accountable for it? So wherever your problem, if they're not using it, you've got all that nice e-learning and they're not using it, what is the reason for that? They're not motivated, they don't have enough time, the manager's not encouraging it, they don't like the content. There's lots of reasons why it might be. And do they also understand how they learn best? So, maybe actually they're not a reflective learner as such. So are there other opportunities to incorporate that kind of development into other ways of learning? Okay, so I'm just looking at that's quite a decent amount of time, is that you were spending, so an hour and 40 every other Friday, was it? Totally agree, Harriet. So are the top team held to account for evidence of learning and development across the teams? So that would be, if it's really visible at that high level. Alan, I think that's a really interesting point. He's saying there's arguably more need for learning the higher you go, as people have succeeded by doing yesterday's job. What an interesting point. So being prepared to be always learning. And certainly taking on new tricks, it certainly can be very difficult if people aren't prepared to learn, because the world is changing so quickly. It should be self-motivating in terms of the job role, but sometimes it's also about people, maybe that being pointed out to people, because I often think it's quite obvious that you should try and think about where the business is going and what a strategy is, or where you want to go, because I naturally think future. But I realize that not everybody does. Some people just think in the here and now. And so helping that's where I think the management plays a real part in terms of coaching people to think about that. So then going on to our final section here. So those are the things that you could take away. You'll get these slides, you can go and think about these. Are any of these food for thought, really things to discuss within your organization? And of course, where these are questions, what can you do about it in these sort of things? So if they don't consider the learning content to be relevant of value, what can you do about that learning content? So it's knowing the reason as to why some of these behaviours might be in place. And then the other thing I think is quite useful, and I'm only going to touch on it here, but this is something that I used in a former life quite effectively. And what we did here was about aligning learning to career pathways. And I say this, I think it's Carrie that's on here, who's going to be an expert in this area. Be interested to know how you're doing it. And the book, I presume it's still in print, but it was quite a good book actually. In fact, it's on my windowsill, it's very yellow, called The Leadership Pipeline. And we used this quite a lot when I was head of learning and development in Siemens. And we looked at how we would, the career pathway, and okay, this is hierarchical, and you've got to be much more flexible now, matrices and things like this. Good book for you, Carrie, then. And the sort of skills that people need in different areas of the role. And ideally about future-proofing them, it's about developing them into the next role. And that will be a tool for retention, of course, which is very, very relevant right now. So what we did was we identified these different roles that people might be in and what the skills might be that they needed to get to the next one. Now, I'm aware that this is the management pathway, right? And I'll talk about this management pathway. We also have a strategy for specialists, which is quite important. But this first level was basically, am I meeting performance targets? Am I performing in my job role? So the starting point actually was performance management. Did people have clear goals and targets? Did they have a clear role description? Did they have clear definition around the expected behaviours? And were they meeting those? And someone who was consistently competent in that area and ambitious would therefore be someone who's eligible on a potential team leader role, which is the next step up. We're going to talk about that in a moment. When you get to the next level, it's about identifying, this is one of the biggest transitions. So this book, they talk about leadership transitions. So when you're going from being a team member to a team leader, however big your team, it's a difference. It's a different role. And really what you've got to take on is letting go of some of your day job. Too many people see the people management, and this becomes a problem in terms of engagement, as being a side element to their day job. basically it's almost a tackle. Now, some people think it's a great side element, and some people think it's an entire distraction side element to that. And one of the main things is mentally, we need to realize that we're going to, as we make that transition, we need to let go of always doing everything and learn to do things like delegating. So some key skills that you need to pick up as you move to that first transition as team leader is moving from being an individual contributor to a team leader. Then as you go further up the ladder, if you've got a larger organization, then you move from being team lead to maybe a cost center manager. This was just our terminology, but a head of department or something like that. And the skills that you need in addition to people management were about finance. So they might have profit and loss responsibility and a broader strategic involvement in the business. They need to deliver results to others. So they're letting go of even more of their individual contributor and move on to the next level. And then depending on how high it is, if you go further up, it becomes much more about strategy. People need to understand that and into being a functional manager. And right at the top, you'd be about empowering specialist functions, profit orientation, short and long-term thinking, leading collaboration. And Alan said, I can't see anything about culture and values. And I think that's a very valid point. Where would you say that that would tend to sit, Alan? It certainly would sit in here. There's a few places I think you'd see it. I mean, think of setting it. Exactly. So you'd see it at the direction. I'd also see it the strategic. As soon as you start being more strategic, you want to be thinking about what is the culture and values that we need. And an example of that, I suppose, would be making sure that if we've said the culture is about employee engagement, and this is one of the drivers here, so making sure that your people managers have the time and skill to manage people effectively in an engaging way, you're developing a culture of engagement in terms of that. So you need to make sure at the senior level that those behaviours are being rewarded and not accidentally broken, right, in terms of those things. The other ways in which values and behaviours, they can be woven all the way through it. And as I go on to the next slide here, there would be certain tools where that would have come through. So here, when we were going up the different roles, we put development in place. So someone who is a high performing team member, they would be eligible to go on the course, which is called Impact, which is all about being a high performer. And some of them then would go through an assessment centre. This is a large company. We can't all do this in SME, but you can get a simplified version of it. You can think about the principle. And you see people who've got the people gene who go up here, and then as a team leader, it was about people management development. Here it was slightly different development in terms of cost center. And then up here, this is where you want really personalized development. And this feeds a bit into Colin's point and Alan's point, sorry. So this is where we might have had masterclasses, we had executive coaching, we used 360 feedback really widely. So we might have had the values, or sometimes we had the competencies. So depending, both of which are behaviors. So if you're trying to really instill a value-led culture, you might use a tool like 360 feedback with different questions that sit alongside the culture, and you'd be able to assess to what degree people were perceived as living those values at a senior level. So that really great way of getting self-awareness. We could also use that 360 for measuring whether or not people were demonstrating the competencies or behaviours of being a line manager, for example, going into one of these. So you could use it at the start and the end of one of these courses. Effectively, the benefit of course, doing something like that, let's say it's a year-long course, is you're able to show through something like 360 feedback that people have grown and developed by doing that, and it demonstrated a return on investment for the money that we spent on training. So that becomes quite a nice fulfilling prophecy, that the people you're asking for money see that actually you are developing the behaviours or the culture that they want you to develop. So that was a way in which we utilised a career pathway in terms of line managers. I haven't got it on here because in the interest of time, so I'm aware there's quite a lot of content in this, but for those of you who are interested, we also did a pathway for specialists, because you don't want to force everybody into line management, particularly in flatter structures, and particularly because some people, frankly, they're never going to be a great line manager, and that's the worst thing you could ever do. So it is really important to think about a similar kind of principle, but maybe as specialists. So we had project management, for example. There were lots of project managers, engineers. We had specialist career paths there, and you might label it, going to senior or consultant or whatever the terminology is. You see this quite often in professional services organisations. But the most important thing is about defining what good looks like at each level so that people can see that they're going to get that development, helping them go to that next level. They get the self-awareness and they get the recognition and the sense of progress. So you can apply that to specialist skills as well. So we're nearly there then. One poll before my practical learning takeaways slide here. So what sorts of development in your organisation are readily encouraged? And let's hear that one. Sorry, it's me. And again, sorry about what types of learning. I've got a grammatical error there, but what type of development is available or encouraged in your organisation? And maybe it's good food for thought as to whether there's other options there that you could use. And you can use, say, that the lunch and learns, I see that as a sort of collaborative way in which somebody might come in as an expert and share a bit of information. We start to do those. So actually, we should do more of them because it's actually learning from each other. It's similar to team sharing or training. But team sharing and training might be when you're actually working together on something. Usually lunch and learn is one specialist, whereas team sharing might be just more about informal collaboration, working together. We've got quite a good mix here. Any others there in terms of the things that you're doing, but still quite a lot of the formal stuff. And so maybe that's one of the things I'll share in a moment to give anyone else who wants to respond another couple of seconds just to respond, and I'll show you what you've said. And maybe the part of the thing is, what do you want to do more of? Are there things that we haven't thought about that we could do more of? So have a look there. So I'll share that with you. So I'll let you take a look at that for your own interest there. I'm hoping actually Caitlin's probably screenshotted these. So if you're interested in the poll responses results, she often puts them in the slides. I don't know whether you have, Caitlin. Hopefully you will be able to, don't worry if not. So what are our practical takeaways? Well, I would say just take a step back. You've already reflected on it during this, in fairness, and thought about the overall learning environment that exists already. You probably already know some of the things that could be different, some of the things that are good. Have a think about how you want to align the need for learning to business need, because that creates a why. So, and business need might be about career pathways. So individual need and business needs absolutely align there, but help people understand why they need to learn things for the future that align with where the organisation is going. And this links to objectives that should be aligning where the organisation is going. Consider how varied and relevant any learning content that you are offering is to an actual need. So does it need a bit of a revamp? So lots of you, 58% are using e-learning. Is it relevant or is it painful? You know, because it does vary really widely. Could you be thinking about learning that's more aligned to roles and pathways, or even build bits of learning into something? Is that if you want to be a future manager, or if you want to be a future project manager, here's a cluster of things you can do. You can read this article, you can do this webinar and this e-learning and go on this course, right? You know, are you bundling stuff together to help people be self-sufficient in terms of things? What can you do to refresh, revitalize, normalize, or incentivize learning? So turning it, as I say, as it was Isar, I think, who had it on here, who was saying that they blocked out time every other Friday. So is it like, can it become a habit in terms of this? But equally, don't overcomplicate things. Less is often more. Start simple, reflect and review. Actually, if I was going to start anywhere, embed a bit of a feedback culture, get your managers to make sure that they are giving regular feedback to people about how they're getting on, that people talk to each other about what works and what doesn't, get that informal stuff doing, because particularly in this hybrid environment, those chats around the coffee machine where you go, oh, do you know, I tried this and it didn't work, or I don't know how to use blah, blah. Oh, I can show you how to use that. That informal learning there's been less of that because people haven't had the relationship where they've been able to ask for things. So start simple, make sure you can get, if you're going to continue to be hybrid, that you can continue to facilitate that informal learning or bring that back to life. Okay, so that's the end of my formal content here in terms of this. Someone just arrived in the waiting room now. I think they're a little bit late for them. I'm going to just share a couple of slides just in case it's relevant to you. So I'll be very quick here. I mentioned 360 because it is something that's really relevant, and I know that lots of you are already using it. if you don't have a provider that you're happy with, or you want to try more 360, then we've always had 360 in Actus, but we've now bundled it as a standalone platform. So it's got some really pretty reports, very, very easy. And you could put your own values in it, or we also have some templates which align to individual contributor, manager, and senior manager. So quite useful if you want to use something like that. I'd use the balanced scorecard alongside something like this, if I was you, because for me, balanced scorecard is about objectives, and you want your objectives which are financial, they might be people related, they might be process and customer. So that's about what you do and what your strategy is. And something like 360 is about your behaviors, how you do it. So it might fit with competencies, or it might fit with values. So anyway, if you want to know more about that, you know that we are an option to talk to. Other things that are coming. So we've got lots in the calendar, and thank you very much for telling us what you'd like to see us do more of, because we're trying to make sure if any of the content that you'd like to see more of wasn't on our drop down list, just say what would be useful there. So I've just one final one from us, in case you want to know anything about it, to save you emailing in, and we will send you these out anyway. So I've got an open demo on Actus 360. Actually, I've got one tomorrow. So if you want to know more about 360, you can come and join us on that in the same way as you signed up here. If you're an independent, and I know that Top Hat Lady, you're an independent and you want 360, we've got an affiliate set up, which is quite interesting if you're a coach. We've got two courses that we run regularly. Hybrid Manager, the next one's full. We are now running a waiting list for June, and Change Superhero, we're operating a waiting list. So any of those I run, do let us know. And there's a range of links here and other useful resources. And Caitlin's been dropping some really nice little topic flyers. So we've got things like a wellbeing topic flyer. Can't remember if there's a learning one. So we've got lots of flyers which have got, it's got all of the resources in one place. So do take a look at the resources section of the website if there's anything that might be of use to you there. All right, so thank you so much for your time. I'm going to put my contact details up, and again, maybe if Caitlin might drop any of these links into the chat to make it easy for people. But link in with me on LinkedIn. We have an HR Uprising group as well, which is on LinkedIn. They can be a bit, I can't say it's the most talkative group, if I'm honest. I think LinkedIn makes it quite hard for us to that there, but it's a good network and it's got a good bunch of people and got more than 1,000 members. So if you want to link on any of those, do please feel free. And if you wanted me to follow up on any of these points, I'll take a note of who's asked for information on here and make a point of following up with you. Thank you so much for your time today. If there are any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or pick up with me via social. Thank you.